Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with veteran jazz bassist Dave Zinno. He talked at length with Neon Jazz about his newest 2019 CD called Stories Told with his Unisphere. He has been performing professionally since 1980, and he's a faculty member at the University of Rhode Island as well as Brown University. After his studies at the Berklee College of Music and the University of Rhode Island, he moved to Seattle, Washington, where he worked with Grammy-winning vocalist Dianne Schuur, and that was for 1 year. Over his long career, he's gigged with jazz greats like Julian Priester, Hadley Caliman, Frank Clayton, and then he moved on to New York City, where he studied with the great bassist Walter Booker Jr. and got thrown into some interesting gigs and shows with them. He's toured all over the world, in Europe, South America, North Africa, and throughout America. So get to know him and dig this interview, my friends.
Dave, thank you for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz. I really dig Stories Told. Looking forward to digging into that and a little bit about your life in jazz.
Oh, man, it's my pleasure. Thanks for playing the disc. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful disc. So talk to me about what the artistic vision for this album was from your perspective.
This one actually goes back to our first recording under the Unisphere name. The group concept was put together with me and my partner, Mike Tucker. We were both in Rio de Janeiro, and we have some connections there. We spend a lot of time there. Been really inspired and influenced by the music from Rio. Decided to try to create a collaborative project between ourselves and some musicians in Rio. Really, it's not Brazilian music, although we have covered a couple of Brazilian classics. Mainly, it's the influence of rhythm and song forms in our own compositions and those of the group. So that was the initial concept. This record is sort of an extension of that. Our drummer, of course, Rafael Barata, is from Rio. But the group is pretty diverse, and I think it covers a lot of different sort of more personal territory as well. So, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely it does. No, and I get that sense from the album. So, speaking of a personal nature, let's get to the beginnings of your life. Where were you born and raised?
I was actually born in the state of Rhode Island, a town called Portsmouth, which is in Newport County, and I grew up kind of like hearing about the Newport Jazz Festival and started going when I was a young teenager. That was some of my first exposure to the music live was at the Newport Jazz Festival. So, yeah, Rhode Island raised. I went to college at Berkeley in Boston, and then from there I moved out west to Seattle, Washington, where I accompanied the singer Dianne Schuur for about a year. And that was the year she got signed to GRP, and then from there I moved to New York City, where I spent a decade working. And before eventually ending up back in Rhode Island, I'm teaching at Brown University, University of Rhode Island, and performing all over the Northeast.
Wonderful. So how did you get into jazz, and what were some of your earliest influences via album and otherwise?
Yeah, I think, like most kids, I started on the guitar, and then I wanted to be in the school band, so I played drums and tuned percussion. When I was a junior in high school, my high school band director said, "Hey, our bass player is graduating in the jazz band. Guess who's going to play bass next year?" And he handed me the book, and I started working on bass, and playing in the high school jazz band got me sort of started, but it was that same teacher and one other teacher who laid on an Oscar Peterson trio record on me with Ray Brown playing the bass, and that sort of turned me around completely. I got my hands on an upright bass and started working on it from there. So I was sort of late to the bass, but dove in head first and never really looked back.
So let's delve into that timeline you laid out a little bit. So when you went to Berkeley, what did you learn there? What was the big growth period of being at Berkeley?
It was interesting. I went to Berkeley. I was 17 years old. I decided to switch to bass as my primary instrument. I was accepted as a guitar principal, but when I arrived, there were over 900 guitar players and considerably fewer bass players, and I realized that would be a great opportunity to play more. And actually, one of my first ensembles I walked into, the great Donald Harrison, was the alto player. And so right away, I kind of got a wake-up call as to what it was to actually play jazz, not the written jazz, but actually to learn tunes and transcribe and begin to develop a concept for improvisation, realizing how many young people were really far ahead of me and how serious a mountain it can be to climb. And, it was a big wake up for me being there. I was only there 1 year and moved on to another university after that. It was a life-changing experience, no doubt about it.
And another one of those life-changing experiences when you went to Seattle to work with Dianne Schuur. What did you learn from her? What did you learn from that time at that period in your life?
Well, the very first day we had rehearsal, I picked her up at her apartment. It was near the Pike Street Market, actually, and brought her to my apartment on Capitol Hill where I had a piano. Her ears are, of course, so impeccable, realizing that she heard absolutely everything that I played. I mean, we would be at her apartment, she'd hear the ferry boats in Puget Sound, and she could tell me which boat it was by how many vibrations per minute the foghorn was. So that was a great lesson in the importance of hearing. And really, I stress to my own students in jazz theory at the universities, hearing and rhythm are the two most important things. Obviously, knowledge of the style is important, but that being able to hear the reharmonizations being laid out by the members of the group, being able to respond tonally and rhythmically to what's happening in the music spontaneously requires a really high level of command of hearing and rhythm. And, of course, on your instrument, too. So Dianne, and she was fun. We had a great time. She had an amazing sense of humor and was really a fine communicator with her audiences.
So when you do finally make it to New York City, I mean, that's like the mecca for a musician. What was that like? Did it feel natural, since you're from the East Coast, or what was it like?
I had obviously the dream that many, young jazz musicians have of actually trying to, see how you do on the world stage. And, so arriving in New York was very exciting. I got lucky. I had a rent control apartment that I could actually afford, and got to be in the city where I started digging in. I got some early successes. I worked, enough to keep myself afloat, and I was getting to interact with some of my heroes, and that was really exciting. The other side of it was realizing just how great, the masters are by, actually hearing them live and getting to know them, learning to speak the jazz language, to understand, on a higher level what actually is going on in the music. Also how broad stylistically the category of jazz really is. It was intimidating. I would get last-minute calls to sub for some well-known bassists. One in particular was Walter Booker Jr., who was working with, regularly at Bradley's, Sweet Basil, and I would get last-minute calls. Look, David, I'm stuck in a recording session. Get down to Bradley's. Play the first 2 sets for me. The first time he called me to do that, I walked in. It was Jeff Keezer's debut, where I didn't realize it, but he was informally auditioning for Art Blakey that night. The drummer was Jimmy Cobb, and, no one expected me. And I asked Booker, I said, do they know I'm coming? He goes, of course not. And they weren't happy, but by the end of the first set, I was okay, and people were being nice to me. Luckily, I already knew Jimmy, and Jimmy gave me the thumbs up. So everybody kind of, I think, breathed a bit of a sigh of relief. That was a pretty intense little situation to get thrown into. I remember Charlie Hayden was sitting in the club, Clifford Jordan, Cecil Taylor was at the bar in his regular spot, Blakey and Baggs walked in together. I mean, it was hard to stay focused, so it was this is the New York experience. You start to learn how to get out of your own way and be able to play your best, and not be so, distracted by who's in the audience, where you're actually playing, and with whom, you start to come into your own, and, become more secure with what you're doing and being able to focus.
Man, you just painted a perfect visual of like the New York City Jazz Nighthawks for me with that story. I could just see everybody sitting there.
So, man, and my head was spinning.
Man, Mine is too. I didn't even live it. You just told me about it. So, and a lot. So, at this point in your life, in your career, are you happy with where you're at?
You know, I have to say that you know, we dream big early on, and what is actually best for you comes into focus later. You know, you have a family to support. You realize that, you know, it's important also to pass on your experience. So I started teaching when I was in my kind of early-ish 30s. You know, I've actually been really fortunate. I always wanted to travel around the world, and I haven't traveled everywhere, but I've been many places around the world and experienced a lot of different cultures. Played on some big stages and a lot of small stages, and it's all good and part of it. So there's always room to move up, Joe.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have to say it's been a good life. I've been really fortunate, and you know, it's not over yet. Let's hope.
Yeah, absolutely, without a doubt. Talk to me about one of the first live jazz shows you saw that really moved you.
You know, I heard Slam Stewart with Illinois Jacquet at Sweet Basil when I was a senior in high school. I took a ride down there one day with my girlfriend from Rhode Island. We wanted to go hear some jazz. The first show I heard was Slam, and I had some bebop records with Slam playing and was intrigued with his singing and bowing, you know. And I got to meet him and speak with him and really feel the swing live in a way that I hadn't really experienced here except at the Jazz Festival. But this was more intimate, you know. I was sitting right in front and really feeling it. And the following night I went to hear Wynton Marsalis's group, and he had, of course, Kenny Kirkland, his brother, Branford. You know, these guys were just a couple years older than me, hearing how developed they were as artists. And I think that's pretty much where, you know, I realized the breadth of the whole thing, and you know, I was really impressed with Wynton's group. So, yeah, that was an important trip, I think.
Tell me this, why do you love jazz?
I love jazz because, I think in a nutshell, because I think it's, of all the different forms of music, it is the player's art form. You know, now we have great players in every style. I mean, certainly in classical music. But I often consider classical music, unless you're the soloist, I think it's a very noble profession to play in an orchestra. And I've done it myself, and it's beautiful. I love it. But in jazz, you have the opportunity every night to express yourself, to insert, you know, your own musical ideas in real time and interact with players on a very intimate level where, you know, let's face it, it's like mining, right? Just because you go into the diamond mine doesn't mean you come out with a diamond. So jazz is kind of like that. There's an element of risk each night where you go in and you go for it, you know. Sometimes you find the diamond, you know, and when you have those nights, that's what kind of propels you to continue, you know, to keep moving more deeply into it. And the further along you get, the more rewarding it is, I think.
As you look into the future, is there anything you specifically really want to do, get done, that you haven't done in your career?
Well, I have to say that the last several years I've made a lot of recordings, and I feel like I've learned so much in that process. I mean, I'm on over 60 recordings in my career. But making records of your own is a different thing. Actually composing the music, shaping the concept, dealing with every aspect of it. And when it comes out and you feel good about it, that's like really rewarding. There's no real monetary reward anymore in making jazz records, but the idea of actually documenting your work and trying to present a finished piece of art. And I hope to continue with that. And of course, you know, to continue sharing music with students and performing. You know, I just want to continue doing what I'm doing. I'm on my way to Rio in a couple of weeks. I'm going to be there for almost it's a little over 2 months actually, and doing some playing with some great people down there. This stuff it's just a breath of fresh air, traveling to new places, you know, finding new inspiration.
So my final question to you is this, and I want to know, everyone has a version or an interpretation of you, your family, your friends, your fans, but you know yourself best. So tell me, who do you think you are?
Who the heck do I think I am? Well, you know, I think I'm a working bassist. I consider myself to be that first. a professional bassist. I get hired by all kinds of different people, lots of different styles. I'm on a lot of people's recordings. I do people's live shows. That first. I also, though, feel now more than ever that I have my own artistic statement to make. That's growing still. And it's just kind of the beauty of jazz, you know, is that it's never really over. You know, it's your life's work, and you keep working on it, you know, until you can't anymore. So I just feel like, you know, I'm all in on this music. I've spent now since I was, 17 years old playing jazz music, and that's 40 years. So I put in 40 years. So I'd say, who am I besides teacher and bassist? A person trying to be the best person I can be and make a contribution to people and culture.
Wonderful. Hey, man, and I think you're doing that. I appreciate the music. I appreciate your time. Thank you again.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks for spinning our music. We really appreciate it a lot.
Yeah.
Good luck to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just standing on the shoulders of giants. That's all.
We all.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Rhode Island, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Dave for his music, his class, and his cool. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and anytime you want, you can go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com for all things neon jazz. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.